Hey MW, I'm Melissa.
And I'm Stephanie Carcache, and we are two sisters and your hosts of Millennial Women Talk, the podcast, the #1 place for millennial women looking to elevate their lives, mind, body, and soul.
And we are so grateful that you're sharing your time with us today. Maria Sosa is a therapist, mind-body health educator, a writer, relationship expert, health coach, and the host of Mind Meets Body podcast. She's one of our favorite people on Instagram to follow because she provides so much value for our mind, body, and soul.
Maria is known for redefining the definition of health by providing content that focuses on intuition, self-determination, and holistic practices. We are so excited to have her on our show today.
Okay, so like I was telling you before we jumped on live, but we love the work that you do. And although Instagram content is not a replacement for therapy, you do put out extremely valuable information that honestly has helped the both of us tremendously. So we really appreciate it. And we would love to know what made you want to help people in the mental health space.
Yeah, so thank you for saying that it is not therapy. I think a lot of people think that they can just get their daily therapy fix from Instagram, and it's just a little blip of such a big, complex concept of mental health. And I talk a lot about holistic health. There's so many components that go into that. And I couldn't possibly explain or get down to anybody's specific problems from one Instagram post, right? So that's one of the things that I find as well, that people will make comments, well, this doesn't apply to me, or for my instance, it's not what it was. And I said, yeah, it's not supposed to. This is a very generalized idea. And the expectation is that you're going to take that information if it works for you and leave it if it doesn't. Or go off and find more information about it on your own. So thank you for saying that. In terms of what brought me to Instagram, I think I just wanted to start sharing information in a way that was digestible. I think when it comes to mental health, there can be a lot of jargon and a lot of vocabulary that people aren't really aware or understanding of what it means. And so I thought, well, if I just create it in a way that's useful, I use a lot of infographics, and I think that that's really helpful for people to kind of understand the concepts. And it's created in a way that it's bite-sized, so you're able to take a bite out of this, understand it, and then kind of find more information on your own. So I just wanted to create more content that was easy to digest.
That is so awesome. And honestly, you're doing such a phenomenal
Yes.
job. And what I love the most, I mean, obviously the feed is just a bunch of goodness, right? It's like I could literally spend hours on your feed, and you cover so many different topics that are just so valuable. So one of the most requested topics that we usually get is relationships. So I really want to talk to you about relationships because you always give so much great advice just on this subject. So a lot of our listeners right now are single, but they still want to be in a relationship. And so many people don't understand that this period can feel really painful and very lonely, especially for women that are over the age of 25 when they're seeing, their friends and peers getting married and having children. How do you help your clients deal with the sadness that accumulates from desiring something that is kind of out of our control?
Yeah, so very valid and very common. And so I think that something that can be useful is to kind of reframe that time from this time of despair and this time of loss or grief on to a time of discovery, right? I don't think that we really get to understand ourselves and understand what we like or what we don't like or what we even want in a relationship. We kind of just find somebody that comes into our life, and then we kind of like, okay, well, is this something that I'm enjoying? Is it something that I'm not? But we really take the time to sit with that and kind of get down to these core values and core belief systems that are so important for when you meet, so that you don't really waste your time. I know that you want to go through the experience of being in a relationship,
Right.
but there's a lot of things from the beginning or off the bat that are clear red flags or clear indicators that things may not be the best for you going into this relationship, right?
Right.
So I think that this time can be really useful for getting to know yourself and getting to know what you want in a relationship.
I love that.
Yeah.
You know, we often hear too, and I definitely have felt like this before, like the I'm not good enough, kind of feeling or belief, just because there's so many of these like insensitive comments that are always thrown around. Like, when are you gonna find someone? Or like, you're such a catch. Why aren't you married yet? I hate that one. How do you what is your advice to women in not allowing these comments from driving them deeper into thoughts of low self-esteem, and ultimately low
Mhm.
confidence? And I know you do very well in like talking about boundaries. So when we hear these comments, like what is some advice that you can give to just women in regards to this?
Yeah, so the first thing is to acknowledge that they are one, painful, so that they do
Right.
create this discomfort for us, and that we don't have to say, oh, it's not a big deal, I'm over it, or, I'm
Right.
done with this emotion, or whatever it may be. Acknowledge the fact that it's uncomfortable and we don't like to hear these kinds of things. And so acknowledge that first. Two, kind of think about the social structure of these comments, right? So they come from our culture. They come from our context. They come from this idea that as a woman at this age, this is what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be in a relationship.
Right.
You're supposed
Right.
to be getting married. You're supposed to be having kids. All these expectations. And so, more than likely, the people around you are going to be making these comments because they live in this culture and this is what's reinforced, right? So, kind of understanding that we're just byproducts of the cultures that we have set
Mm.
forth for
Yeah,
women specifically.
I know.
And then with that, you can understand that also saying, and by the way, I'm not okay with the comments, right? So I understand where you're coming from. I understand that this is common, but this is not okay for me because I feel this, and that, right? So I
Mm,
don't want to experience this pressure that you're putting on me. I don't want to be on this timeline that has been created for me. I want to make sure that I create my own timeline, a timeline that works for me. I may not want to have kids. I married. I may not, right? So I allow me the time and the space to make that decision for myself. And those are things that we really have to have clear, open conversations about, especially with our family, because I think that's where we hear it the
Right.
most. So making sure to say, I know that these are the expectations that you have for me. However, this is what I'm thinking, or this is what with my life. And so that is part one. And then part two is if you're not able to kind of keep these conversations or these comments to yourself, then then you have to set a consequence there. I may leave the conversation, or I may
Mm.
not continue to engage with you, and I may switch the subject, right? So you're kind of saying, this is allowed, this is not allowed. And if this happens, this is the consequence. So kind of the boundary, quote unquote, equation of saying how it makes you feel, why it's not
Right.
okay, and then a consequence of the behaviors going forward.
yeah. And I think that's so important, right? Because it's very easy for people to say, oh my gosh, but I'm just kidding. Or it's not that
Right.
big of a deal. Or like, oh, you'll find someone, right? If they kind of retract after saying that comment, you know, and it happens a lot in families, right? And I feel
Yeah.
like now because of the holidays, it's like even worse.
Yeah.
But it's something interesting too. And there's someone close in my family that's experiencing this. What I'm about to ask you, right? And so we also have women in our community, and someone close to me who actually do not want a relationship right now. So what they are feeling is actually to be alone. So they feel the need to be alone, but they don't know what to do with this time, right? So how can they allow this time to focus on them, and what truly should they be focusing on, right? That's a
Yeah,
good one.
yeah. So that's a great thing to be aware of, right? That you don't want to be in a relationship. What a gift to be able to kind of have that, because I think that even with all the
Right.
cultural components of it, we tell ourselves that we don't want to be in a relationship, but there's still a human part of us that wants to be loved. So that's a very human feeling to want to be
Right.
cared
Right.
for. So I think we can also create space for that, to know that we want to be alone, but that
Yeah.
love is a very human thing, and we want to be loved, we want to be cared for, we want to be in connection to somebody. So I think that those two things can be good to look at. And then also experiencing other types of relationships, right? So just because we want to be alone doesn't mean that we have to be lonely. We don't have to kind of sit in a corner by ourselves and
Mm,
journal, or kind of process everything by ourselves. We can be in connection with other people and nourish friendships, we can nourish relationships with coworkers, our family. So kind of understanding that in an intimate relationship doesn't mean lonely in other areas of our life.
I love that.
Mm.
How does that benefit? So like, so if your focus is on other relationships, nurturing them, how does that benefit us for when we do find that person that I like to say the one, but when we find the one, like how does that benefit that?
Or the ones, maybe it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
one.
True.
Yeah, I think you're just your place because you're not basing everything on this one relationship, right? You're not kind of
Right.
gaining your sense of identity or your sense of happiness or kind of putting all your things in one basket or all of yourself in one relationship, right? So you have
Right.
friendships and you have family relationships. And so kind of it allows for a balance, it allows for different identities, different areas of yourself, so that when you do find this relationship, the one or the ones, then it's an added bonus to everything that you already have.
Mm.
You're already
Oof.
engaging in very nourishing relationships, and now this is another relationship which is much more intimate and will bring
Wow.
different benefits, but it's an add-on, it's a bonus, it's not your everything.
I
Oof.
love that you're
That was
saying
very
the
good.
ones because I do believe that every single relationship has a purpose and a meaning in your life. Like that person was brought to you for a reason. Um, and when that ends, it's very difficult, right? Um, and we do get this question a lot. Like, I mean, girls, we love to talk about relationships. So it's like always something that we always hear, but like closure and like does everything have to have a meaning or like what is closure and why do we need it to sort of like get over the feeling? Do we even need it to get over like those sad feelings? Like I want to talk a bit about closure.
Yeah, so I think as humans, we are meaning making machines. We want things to have meaning. We want things to have a purpose. We
Yes.
want to say that this happened
Yeah.
for a reason. And I think that's just human nature, right? We don't want to be wandering off into the world
Mhm.
aimlessly. Things have purpose, then we kind of are able to learn from things in a certain way. So if we've had a relationship that didn't end the way that we wanted, but we realize that we got a lot from it, that we learned a lot about ourselves, about the kind of people that we want to date or be in a relationship with going forward, then that's a very different place than, well, that meant nothing. And I just wasted, a whole year of my life and nothing came from it. And
Mhm.
so kind of having,
That's a
yeah,
big
so
one.
having
Yeah.
that thought of, okay, well, what can I take from this going forward and how is this going to affect my relationships in the future? I think that that's so important and we need it. We really do because it's the only way that we truly, quote unquote, get better at relationship is to go through them, right? Nobody teaches you how to be a partner unless
Yeah.
Right.
you are actually in a partnership and you get to try out these different behaviors and you get to be a caring and compassionate person, or then you get to be this angry person that is very aggressive or verbally abusive, right? You have to go through all these things to kind of understand what your
Right.
relationship style is, and it changes from relationship to relationship because every relationship is a different interaction, right? So
Totally.
you are yourself, you bring yourself into the relationship, but
Hmm.
there's also the third component of the relationship between us two. So that's a whole nother thing. And when it comes to
Right.
closure, it's such a tough subject because we want it. We want to neatly tie it up with a bow. We want to say, this is it and I've got it. But relationships are messy, emotions are messy. We don't really get to put it neatly into a box and say, this is it and I'm done feeling. They can come back. We can kind of feel things again that we hadn't felt for a long time that had been dormant, and they show up out of nowhere, and then we kind of blame ourselves and think, I thought I was over this, I thought I was done feeling or having these things for this person. And so I think closure is what you make of it. Closure is what you decide is that you need at that
Right.
Mm.
moment. And it may look like learning, it may look like growth, it may look like deciding that that was a beneficial relationship because you got this out of it, but it doesn't look clean cut, it doesn't look this beautifully tied up, because it doesn't. Our hearts don't work that way. Our emotions don't work that way.
Yeah.
And to kind of put the pressure on ourselves to have that closure, I think it's unnecessary. However, it's really tough when you want to have a quote unquote closing conversation with the person and they are not able to have that conversation with you, or they've ghosted you, and now you really feel very uncomfortable about the fact that you can't even
Mm.
say what you want to say to this person, and get that,
Yeah.
not closure, but just
Yeah, it's so important, right? And it means so differently for different people,
Right.
like kind of their
yes. And
expectations
then
with it.
sometimes means that we have to write a letter to
I
the
love that.
person because we didn't get a chance to actually say it, and kind of allow whatever is flowing in your mind to be written on paper. You don't have to send it, you can or not. You decide to do with that what you will. But we need a place to kind of process the things that we wanted to say and we didn't get a chance to.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. And we're kind of you mentioned this a little bit earlier, and there's a post that you have on your Instagram too that we love. So you talk about the red and the green flags of relationships, but I know there's so many because I remember from the post. But what are your top like green flags and what are your top red flags? Like maybe I guess 3 of each.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to think about my post, but I know exactly the one that you're talking about. And of course, again, these posts are overly simplified versions of like very complex subjects, right? It's so
Yeah.
sweet to put green and red flags and how cute it is to be able to do that. But again, relationships are messy and it's a
Right.
bit more complex than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think some really great green flags, because I love talking about the positives, is having that honesty from the get go, right? So making sure that honesty and trust are a priority. So, is the person that you are talking to somebody who values honesty, and because of that honesty that is being built, you have trust for that person. So that's a big green flag for me. Being able to communicate and repair. We don't expect relationships to be perfect, but the way that we are communicating is kind and compassionate. And when there are problems, then we have to look for ways to repair. So we want to make sure that we're communicating in a certain way, and that when we're not communicating in the best way, when we're heated, when we're in an argument, we want to make sure that we're looking for ways to repair. And so being open to repair and being open to making changes and having that accountability that we've made a mistake, that's a really amazing green flag to have at the beginning
That's
of
a
a
good one.
relationship.
That is a good one.
Um, yeah. And then having common values and a common belief system. So you don't have to have everything in common with the person that you're with, but there's some pretty big things that definitely need to be in line in a relationship to continue forward. So, for example, kids, right? So if you're with somebody that wants to have kids and the other person doesn't, then that's kind of one of the things that you have to take into consideration going forward. And do I want to invest in this relationship if ultimately, I want to have kids and they don't? So how do I make this work? Do I stick it out? Is it really that important for me? Do I change my mind about this? So it's really important to kind of have those basic values and belief systems in line. I think those are my 3
That's important.
in terms of green flags.
Yeah.
Definitely, I feel like in the red flags, like people usually like when you hear something about like, I don't want to have kids, right? You're like, well, maybe it's just they feel like that right now. And that's like, you get very optimistic when it comes to red flags. I mean, how much do we give like grace to red flags? And then when is like a red flag just like a red flag? And I think, especially us, right?
Yeah.
Especially women, we're so emotional and we're so empathetic naturally. That is kind of difficult when you see a red flag like the children. You might automatically be like, well, he doesn't want it right now, but he'll grow into it after being together like for 2 years, right? Together. Like I mean, it's interesting because it's like, when do you give grace and when do you take things at face value?
Yeah, I think that's something that you kind of gauge and go. It's definitely a trial and error. So with the red flags, I always like to think of them as stop signs, right? So not as like a word that means no. It just means it's a
Mm,
stop sign. It means look at this behavior, look at what's happening, stop and
that's good.
That's
evaluate
really good.
what it means to you, and kind of decide whether you want to keep on going or if you want to make sure that you stay at that stop sign further. So it's more of a pause. It's more of a moment for you to
I
kind of
love that.
decide what to do going forward.
Yes,
I
I
love that.
love that. It's like red
Yeah.
flags are a stop sign. I love it.
Look both
Yeah.
ways before you
Yeah.
cross.
Yes.
Exactly. This is what it
Which goes
means.
into like, yeah. And even like when you think about, because I also saw you were talking about like toxic people are not, so like people are not necessarily toxic, it's their behavior. And that's
Mhm,
definitely a red flag, right? Like anything that's toxic,
mhm.
that's making you feel super yucky. It's like, that's definitely a red flag. Um, and I kind of like this approach that you're saying. It's like take a step and pause. Like, is this that person or is it their behavior? Which it's usually the behavior, whether it's
Mhm.
learned, can it be unlearned? Like, how can we navigate toxic people? Because I do think
Yeah.
that that's such a subject now in a lot of our conversations. Like, this person is so toxic. Like, we hear that all the time. So let's talk
Mhm.
a little bit about toxic people and their behaviors.
Yeah. So the thing about what you just said is that they're behaviors, right? So I
Right.
want to make sure that we acknowledge that we're all human, we all make mistakes, and we all have behaviors that are toxic, right? That's not our identity. We are not
Right.
toxic per se. We are engaging in
Right.
ways that are toxic because we've learned to engage in this way, because we were taught, because of our experiences. That's kind of what it might, right? So that is
Right.
how I've always engaged in my life, and that's what feels right. And behaviors can be changed. That is the great thing about behaviors and about all the things that we do for our healing, for our growth. They're behaviors. And so if we want to change, so that's another big thing. We have to want to change these things. We have to want to see, we have to have a reason for changing. If not, then it
Right.
makes no purpose whatsoever, and you can't change somebody, and you can't say, if you do this for me, then we will continue forward in the relationship, because that's only sustainable for a short amount of time. So a person
Mhm.
Right.
may do something for another person, but if they're not fully invested, if they themselves aren't intrinsically motivated to change, it's not going to last. It's
Right.
very much on a time frame. It's on a time limit. It's not sustainable, because we have to want to have that change, because we see that it's necessary for our well-being. So if we don't have a problem with the way that we're engaging in the world and we think it's fine, then we're going to
Mhm.
continue to do that, right? So I think that we need to take that person's tendency or want to change into consideration as well. Do you see anything wrong with your behavior? Do you see that there is a possibility for having a better interaction with your partner, and understanding that abusiveness and aggressiveness is not the way to go?
Yeah.
And if they do, great, and that's something that we can work on and change. But if they don't,
Mhm.
no matter how much magic we try
Yeah.
to work into it, or how many um, therapeutic components we go
Right.
through, it's not going to be useful.
Yeah. This is not going to get better per se, but um, I want to deviate just a little bit from relationships, because it was something that me and Steph, actually, you've talked about this in the past, and we're like, what does this all mean? But you've spoken about situational depression. What exactly is situational depression?
Yeah, I think we're all going through that right now.
Right? 2020 has been a
So
year.
That would be like the title of 2020,
Situational
situational depression.
depression.
exactly, yeah. So situational depression is just as the name suggests. Situations happen in life. Things come
Right.
into our context, into our environment, that trigger this depression in our bodies, that trigger a slowdown in our mindset, that
Right.
trigger this idea of hopelessness and helplessness that puts us into this
Yeah.
depression. It's not a clinical depression per se, as those individuals who are diagnosed with depression due to chemical imbalances or genetic reasons, or there's so many reasons why people um, have depression. But this is more related to a specific incident. So something has happened to trigger
Right.
this depression, as opposed to generalize where it's just nothing's really happening, but there's this constant state of hopelessness, helplessness. I don't feel well. I can't get out of bed. I don't have any energy. And there's no real, quote unquote, no real reason for it. With situational, there's definitely an event that happened and
Mm.
a symptom right afterwards.
Mm.
So that's kind of
That's
what
interesting.
it goes into. And this year has definitely been that.
Yes.
You know, it's so important. What you just said is so valuable and so vital. And I'll tell you why. Because so many women in our generation and people around us, right? They just feel like, oh, if I feel this way, I'm depressed. I'm clinically depressed, right? And not to,
Yeah.
you know, say that that's not valid. It is, but if only people could realize there's probably so many more situational depressioners than clinically, right? And I
Right.
think that that's so useful because I feel like someone listening can say, oh my gosh, that just clicked to me,
Yeah.
right? So it's definitely clicked to me in terms of my past and saying, oh, I know why I felt that way during that season in my life, or
Right.
I really maybe wasn't clinically depressed, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so what you just expressed is so valuable and is going to help so many people, and especially during this time. Because it's like
Yes.
what you said. I mean, this year is definitely that, and people are going through a lot of grief and
Right.
sadness and all these different things. So thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that's so important.
Yeah.
I think that it helps to have a name for it as well, because sometimes it's like,
Right.
well, I don't know what I'm feeling. I can't like put my hand on it, and it's just like this
Yes.
overwhelming hopelessness, and I don't know what to do with it. And so sometimes like, oh, okay, so situationally speaking, this happened and this triggered a depression in my body. That's so much easier than
Right.
what's wrong with me, or I can't believe I'm feeling this way and I just can't get out of bed, and my energy, and kind of like that self blame and shame that we go into when we don't
Yes.
have full force, or we're not 100% ourselves. Like, to have a name to it, but also not to over identify with it, right? So kind of
Mm,
knowing that this is what I'm feeling, but this is not who I am.
That's
This
good.
is something that I'm going through. This is not something that I have to hold on to in terms of my identity.
Right.
It never is with depression or anxiety or any diagnosis that we may have. But those are symptoms. Those are things that are happening in our body. It is not who we are. And so
That
it
is
helps
mm.
give
so
it a name,
powerful.
but also not overly identify with
Right.
Oof, so
Oh, that
good.
is so good. Okay, I have a lot of questions.
it.
So, I
I'm
love
here.
the fact that you should not identify. So, actually, our mom always told us that. Like, every time we would be like, oh my God, I'm sad, it's like, I feel sad. It's like
Hmm.
changing kind of even the verbiage so that you don't attach yourself to that. She doesn't even, I remember like, well, our mom is very old school, like the depressed and stuff. She's like, no, no, you're having a moment. Like, this is not, but which is very interesting, when you compare older generations to our generation now, but we're a lot more able to speak about this stuff freely. So I want to talk about not identifying it, but not denying it, right? Because
Mm.
I do feel like some people say, they tell you, oh, stop saying you're sad, stop saying you're sad. But it's like, I feel sad, like I feel sad right now. So it's like, how do you not identify, but then allow yourself also to process, by denying? So I want to talk because you have so many great nuggets about emotional processing versus emotional bypassing. So
Hmm.
can we kind of get into that because you're so good at explaining
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. So emotions are an actually physiological response in your body. So if I have been
Mm,
triggered because I'm angry that anything that could have happened, right? So I had a presentation that I was going to be doing this year, and of course, because of COVID, it got canceled, right? And so my emotional reaction to that at first
Right.
was sadness and anger. And so that sadness and that anger actually has a physiological response in my body. Your body actually feels that. It
mm,
triggers all these chemicals and it elicits that, oh, this is anger in my body, or this is sadness in my body, right? We almost think
Right.
that emotions
mhm.
are these like fluffy clouds kind of like floating around. There's an actual physiological response in the body. Now, feelings, that is the psychological
Right.
component of it. And that's kind of like how you interpret what's happening in your body. So you've got the emotions in the body and you've got the feelings in the mind. And so if something is physiologically happening in our body, it's so important to acknowledge it. It's so important to say, this is happening. This is anger. With the anger, my face is flushed. With the anger, my stomach is kind of hurting, and all these hormones are rushing there, or rushing wherever they may be in the body to kind of deal with this new emotion that is being felt. And then the feeling part of it is kind of saying, okay, this is the anger that I'm feeling, and I'm feeling angry because this happened. And that makes sense that I'm feeling this anger. It makes sense that I'm feeling it. And I guess that looks like
Right.
disappointment. Now,
Yeah.
now I'm really disappointed psychologically, feeling this disappointment. And okay, that's what that is, right? So, and it's such a basic thing to do, to give it that space rather than saying,
Right.
oh, I can't be disappointed, or I can't be sad, or I can't be angry because I have to be positive all the time, or I have to be happy. Or my favorite is, I just need to be grateful and
Oh,
be
yes.
okay with all the things that I have right now,
Oh, that's
right? That's always
such
a
a
good
good
one.
one. Oh my God.
Yeah, yeah. As if we couldn't be grateful and still feel bad, right? Those
Right.
two things can both coexist. I'm so grateful that I have so much in my life. And I'm still really angry, and I'm still really upset that things didn't work out the way that I wanted. Both of those things are valid, and there's space for both of them. So when we talk about emotional bypassing, it's that first part where we say, or we negate and we invalidate our
Mhm.
emotions, we invalidate our feelings, because we think that we need to be in this constant state of positivity and constant state of gratitude, because if not, then we're being
Right.
bad people. If not, we're
Right,
complaining.
right.
If we're not, then we're just like, just stop being this annoying person that isn't satisfied, right?
Right.
Right.
And then the emotional processing component of that is making sure that we honor these feelings, making sure that we acknowledge their presence, give them the space to kind of settle in, right? So give them time. They're going to pass, right? They're not going to be here forever. Give it the time, give it the space to be there. You can sometimes welcome them and say, welcome, anxiety. I see that you're here. I see that you have a message for me. Maybe this is something that I really care about. This is something that's really important for me. And that's why this is being brought into my body or into my thoughts at the moment. And then we can release them. Then we can
Yeah.
say, I thank you for what you brought. I thank you for the information. I thank you for the data. And now I'm ready to move on, or to move forward, or I'm ready to sit a little bit longer with them and journal about it, whatever you decide to do with it. But it's so important that we process it rather than bypass it.
Yeah,
But I think
definitely.
also like what you said about they do pass, right? Because I think sometimes we don't want to fully process things because it's a scary thing. Like we don't,
Right.
if we allow ourselves to sit with this, how long is how long do we have to sit with it? Like, does
I
it ever go
know.
away, the sadness or the anxiety? Especially some people have been dealing with these sort of feelings
Yeah.
for years. And do they pass? Do they ever really
Like, but
fully
forever?
pass?
They do. So they do pass. They have, and I think they just go through shifts, right? So
Right.
I think that when we are going through them, we feel that nothing has changed or nothing has shifted. Like we're just in this constant state of sadness, because we also direct our attention to just that, right? So we're
Mm,
not focusing or directing our attention to other things that may be working. We're so stuck, or we're so geared towards only seeing the sadness that we forget that there's joy in a lot of different areas, right? So yes, the sadness exists, but where am I finding joy, or where am I finding
mm,
peace, or where am I finding ease? And when you redirect your attention to those times, you find that there's
Yes.
a lot more joy. You find that there's a lot more things that are going well for you than you thought. But our
Yeah.
brains are kind of interesting in that way, that they like to focus on the negative quite a lot. So it takes a lot of
they do.
effort to redirect, and it takes a lot of time. Yeah, it takes a lot of time to kind of shift it and nudge it towards a different direction. But it's there, and it's accessible to us to do that, to shift the attention.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that. I mean,
Focus.
Exactly.
We've been talking about this, like, honestly,
Yeah.
2020 was like the year of focus, like, because it's like a practice, and you have to like really force yourself. Because I mean, do you think that sometimes our mind just likes to focus on the negative just because that's kind of like a safety
Yes.
net? Like, let me just focus on the worst case scenario so that I keep myself safe, right? Like, is that what we usually
Yeah.
tend to do?
Yeah. So our brains are actually more susceptible to that negative information because negative information kept us alive, right? So
Right.
if you think back to our ancestors and we think about what we needed to learn in order to be safe, right? We needed to remember those really negative emotions so
Right.
that it would keep you away from, the saber-toothed tiger
Right.
or any of those things that really could have had a detrimental effect on your life.
Right.
So you need to remember the negative in a very important way because it's what's going to keep you safe and it's what's going to keep you alive. And so we have negative memories that are very, they have a lot of meaning to us, right? So it's really easy to remember the argument that your partner and you kind of like pinpoint that and you say, I know exactly what happened and I know what it was. But it's really hard to remember a really positive engagement that you had during the day, right? It's
Right.
like happy moments are great. We like them, we like to experience them and we like to have them, but they just don't get remembered the same way in our brain. They
Right.
just don't naturally. So the negative always overrules the positive from an evolutionarily psychological perspective. And it's really interesting because Dr. John Gottman and his research, along with other relationship researchers, have found this ratio of, in terms of relationships and intimate relationships, it's that you need 5 positive interactions to offset one negative interaction, right? So if
Wow.
you have one negative interaction with your partner, you're going to need to have 5 positive ones to neutralize, not even to like get to a place where you're feeling great, to just
Wow,
neutralize
that's
and
crazy.
offset that negative interaction that you
My gosh.
have. 5 to 1.
I mean, in a way, I
It
feel
makes
like
sense,
when I'm
though.
going through my history, I'm like,
Yeah.
totally, it took 5.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I love, it's so funny because we talk about this all the time, and you have a series on Instagram called the Yes and I love those because they're so great. And so one of them, oh my gosh, resonated with us so much because we were like, yes, we relate to this. You had written something to the effect of like, yesterday I was dancing in my kitchen, singing happy, and today I'm on the couch crying with anxiety. And sometimes when we look at it, I'm like, am I going crazy? She's like, am I going crazy?
I know.
So we freak out. Is this normal? Just let us know if this is
I
normal.
mean, it goes
So
from one
normal.
extreme to the
Yes.
other. Like, you could be super, super happy, and then it's like, what? It's so weird.
Yes, so normal. And I think people go through exactly what you go through. Like, what's wrong with me? Like, how can I shift from one thing to another? There must be some sort of imbalance going on with me, or I'm totally, dysregulated, or what's wrong with me? And we're so complex. We can totally go from one thing to another. And I think that if anything, that's what this year has taught us, this ability to feel yes and. Yes, I am feeling grateful and I'm also feeling very anxious and I'm also feeling very sad and depressed and I don't feel great, right? Similarly with I'm dancing in the kitchen and then I'm crying because there's so much going on. And instead of shaming ourselves for that and saying there must be something wrong with me or I'm such a mess, because I think that's we like to use that one, I'm such a mess,
Oh my God, yeah.
giving ourselves that compassion and saying this is tough, I'm trying to manage here, I'm doing the best that I can given the situations, and it makes sense that I would go through these fluctuations and things that are happening. The world is very unstable right now.
Yeah.
So I'm managing and I'm doing the best I can.
And I love that. And I think it's like a testament to who you are. I mean, you're holistically Grace,
Right.
you know? And I think sometimes it's I mean, even in our own history, like we've seen, just kind of people that end up going the medical route to kind of help them in all these feelings. And just hearing you speak, it really brings a lot of comfort, because I think there's so much power in just simply understanding what is going on and the practicality and logical sense of things, right? So like,
Mhm.
giving yourself that, allowing yourself to feel the yes and, right? So like,
Mhm.
yes, I'm grateful that I am breathing right now, and I am still upset about, COVID
Yeah.
canceling my
Right.
plans, right?
Right.
Yes.
And just like that kind of natural, like when you're thinking about, I'm breathing, I'm happy, I'm grateful. And then when you think about your canceled plans, in that 1 second sentence, you feel two different types of emotions. And that's like the logical and practicality that I feel that have been bringing through your content, and just, in your mission, I guess, with Holistically Grace. So I think that that's great. That's really fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to go back to the point that you made about medication. And I want to make sure that people understand that I'm not anti medication, right? I think
Right.
that medication is a powerful component to therapy and to all the things that we do for our mental health. So I'm not against that. Just saying that there's a lot more that we can be doing for ourselves
Right.
in companionship, or in addition to, or before we decide to go down the medicine route. Again, there's so many things, and everybody is different. Everybody needs different things. And some people may need medication, and some may be just fine kind of engaging in their bodies and doing the body work and the embodiment. So making sure that we have space for all of it, holistically speaking. There's space for it all, and you get to decide what works for you.
I love that.
Maria, we want to thank you so much for your time today. I mean, it was like everything we expected, just because like we've been following you for so long, but like on another level. So we're
Well,
so
thank
grateful
you.
for your time. Thank you so much for sharing all of your value with us and with our community. It truly means a lot to us, and we're grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so enjoyable and easy, and I loved sharing what I had to share. And you had some great questions as well. I really appreciate it, and all the thoughtfulness that went into them. Thank
Of
you.
course. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you want to learn more about Maria, follow her on Instagram at Holistically Grace and visit her website, holisticallygrace.com, to learn more.
Don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so you never miss an episode. This helps us continue to bring you powerful conversations just like this to you every single week.
And as always, we encourage you to continue on with the conversation.
Always remember to keep being the strong, amazing woman that you are, and never forget to live inspired.
Until next time,
Always love,
Melissa
and Stephanie Carcache.